Hi, I'm Wendy from Shiny Happy World, and today I'm going to show you how to box in the corners of a shape, like a tote bag or a pillow or a stuffed animal, to give it a little depth or thickness. So here's what I'm talking about. This is a small little tote bag, and you can see that at the bottom of the bag I've boxed in the corners, and that gives the bag a little bit of fatness, so it can hold fat things instead of being just a flat bag. This technique is used most often in bags and in pillows, but sometimes I like to use it in stuffed animals. So I have this little mouse, and you can see that I also boxed in his bottom corners the same way. It's a way that you can give a stuffed animal a nice fat bottom so he sits nicely without having to set in a smaller pattern piece, which especially on a small softie like this little guy, setting in a small piece on a small pattern like this can just be fussy. And this is a much easier way of doing it. So this is how we do it. I've sewn up a fake little piece that shows you what it's going to look like on a bag size where you've got a square edge. This is two pieces sewn together, and I use two different colors so you'll be able to see what's happening. And this side looks more like what the bottom of a stuffed animal might look like, because I want to show you two different things that you might see in my patterns. So the pattern's going to tell you to turn the seams and line up the side seam with the bottom seam, and here's what you're doing. You're going to slip your hand into the pattern just to get it into the little bag and pull it apart. And I'm turning it so that the side seam is now lined up with the bottom seam. You can do it with the seam allowance flat, but I like to open it up. It just makes it a little bit easier to line things up. So I've got my seam allowance here opened up, and you can get everything folded flat. And then I like to do a quick check to make sure that I've actually got these really well lined up on top of each other, that both my seams are together there. I just take a pin and I stick it through one seam and make sure that it's coming out pretty close to it on the back. And that's good. So I've got a good seam there. Now it's important to know when you're doing this, this part is nice and flat. The back part over here, this is just a wadded up mess. That's okay. All that needs to be nice and flat is the little section that you're working on. So sometimes the pattern instructions will tell you to stitch a line across here perpendicular to your side seam and your bottom seam, and you're going to measure down a certain length from the tip there down to wherever it tells you. So I'm going to do a sample here of just measuring it down an inch. The important thing to know when you're doing this, and this is especially tricky if you don't open up the seam allowance, is you're measuring from the tip of the sewing, not the tip of the fabric up here. So I'm going to use my clear ruler because that makes this easy. And I'm going to line up, since I need to mark this an inch away from the tip of the sewing, I'm going to line it up so my 1 inch is right at the tip of that stitching line. And I'm going to make this line here lined up exactly on my seam allowance, or on my stitching line. So I know when I draw a line here, it's going to be exactly perpendicular to that line of stitching. So you would not normally use a ballpoint pen for this, but I want you to really be able to see the line that I draw here. So you just draw that line. And then you can take it over to the sewing machine and just sew right on that line. I'm just going to pin it for a second. I'll take it over to the machine in just a minute. So I'm going to pin it to hold it in place while I do the other side and show you the other way of kind of measuring. So we'll let this flop down for a second. So here's the stuffed animal kind of shape. This is what your seam might look like if you're making a stuffed animal. And anytime you have points that go in like this or concave curves, you have to snip into the seam allowance. That's going to be a handy little marking for you when we do this process, because now you're not going to need to measure anything. So we're going to do the same thing here. Work your fingers in just to get it started poofing out a little bit. And I'm going to open up that seam allowance. That'll also tend to minimize bulk if you're working on something small where the bulk is going to make a difference. So I've pulled this out, flattened this down, and now I'm just going to double check and make sure that my seams are lined up. Yep, those are perfect. And on this one, I'm going to go ahead and pin that to keep it. On this one, I've already got this snip marking where that perpendicular line is going to be. I could draw it, but this is such a small little piece, I'm really not going to worry about it. I'm just going to eyeball it and sew my line across there. So I'm going to go to the sewing machine and sew both of those corners, and then I'll come back and show you the last step. So I sewed right on top of that line that I drew. I did make sure to backstitch at the beginning and end because there is going to be a little bit of pressure on these once you stuff whatever this is. I did the same thing on this side. Sewed it from beginning to end, just lined up with that little snip that I had, and backstitched at the start and the finish. So the last thing you're going to want to do is cut away all of this extra now. So just eyeball a 1/4 inch seam, and do it on this side too. And then when you turn it right side out, you'll see that you now have a shape. This is obviously a very weird shape that I just did as a sample here. But you'll have a shape now that has depth to it. So that's it. This is a really easy method for giving depth to anything that you're sewing. They're most commonly used for tote bags and pillows, but I do like to use it sometimes with stuffed animals, especially smaller stuffed animals where you really don't want to mess with a set-in tiny little pattern piece at the bottom of it. I'm Wendy from Shiny Happy World. I'll see you next time.